You all set? You good to go?
As good as it's gonna get, man.
You're listening to Squatch Talks Podcast. Real stories and real encounters told by real researchers. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Squatch Talks Podcast.
How's everybody doing tonight?
I'm doing awesome. I can't stop. I'm glowing. Tonight we have joining us Dr. Jeff Meldrum, professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University. Really needs no introduction, obviously. He's been on just about every program, every podcast. I mean, he's written books and other guides to squatching. And of course, he's the author of Sasquatch.
Legend meets science.
Thank you. Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, which I have sitting right here. I could have looked. But hey, I'm thrilled, and we're going to bring him on in a moment. Just wanted to, of course, thank everybody for clicking on the video, sharing us with your friends and family, right?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Subscribing. And hey, all the comments and likes and things are always appreciated. So wanted to get that out of the way, get the business taken care of early on so that we can jump right in as soon as Jeff joins us on the call. So I guess it would help if I sent him a link, right? I did this with Matt too. I mean, I think I did, but we'll just be safe and do it again. It's always a good idea to be thorough. So Nathan, I hope everybody saw the post that we did about the Yeti bars. Okay, our friends at yetibars.net also made up a couple of videos. One was the soap making video of our Squatch Talks podcast bar. Did you get a chance to see that, Nathan?
I did watch that. Yeah,
wasn't that really cool? Yeah, I enjoyed watching that. And then they had the unveiling when it was cured video and cutting the bars, which I found also very interesting. But also they sent out an email to all their customers announcing the new bar and linking us in the video with a direct link right to our YouTube channel, which I thought was really nice of those guys.
Yeah, super great. Super nice guys.
So we're excited because the Squatch Talks podcast bar it's available now. It's up on their website, yetibars.net. And here comes Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum to Squatch Talks podcast. Let's not keep him waiting.
Of course not.
Welcome back to Squatch Talks podcast. And we are here tonight with a special guest, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University. So help me welcome Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Thanks for coming on.
You bet. My pleasure. Thank you.
So we're excited to talk to you. There's so many things, of course, that go through my mind. Of course, like I was saying, I met you at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference in 2019. Okay. My wife Heather and I. And of course, we got our copies of the book you wrote, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science. Got my autographed copy here. And Heather's is on the display behind me.
I see it. Yeah, there we go.
You see it? I'm the only health food store in America, Dr. Meldrum, that has a Bigfoot museum built right inside.
That's great. Yeah.
Complete with track casts.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent.
Including the one that I called you about from Walla Walla, Washington.
That's right. Yeah.
Remember I told you it cracked?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Originally,
all right.
Originally, it only cracked right through the middle when I pressed down. Okay, it only cracked right through the middle.
Yep.
Then, see the real deal is I was making a mold. Okay, and they sent us the raw materials. And it got stuck inside. It didn't release.
Right.
Because it was rubber. Okay, so it got destroyed. I don't know if you can see, but there's a number of chips and cracks. Okay, but you can still read the autograph.
There you go.
Which I'm proud of. And it looks pretty decent for
it does. Yeah.
A cast that went through what it did. But that was a learning lesson for me. I will never, ever use something that's as important and that means as much to me as this again to make a mold or a recast. I'm telling you. So thank you for your advice on repairing that.
Glad I could help.
Oh, and this, you know what? I got the Elmer's glue, like you mentioned.
Right, sure.
But I went with the they had two choices, the kids' school glue and then the better one. I went with the better one.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it's funny because remember I said to you, I was thinking Gorilla Glue would be appropriate, you know?
Yeah.
And that would work. I mean, it's a variation on that theme. It has just a little more some adhesive element in there, I think, but it's still that kind of
type of stuff. But I never had success
glue,
with Gorilla Glue, you know? In other things I've tried gluing, it's just never seemed to stick. But yet this stuff works great. So the other one, though, the Pine Barrens cast really got destroyed. And that was my original that I had made on expedition back in 2015. So that really, I mean, I didn't express it at the time with my friend who was helping me make the molds, but I was devastated that my real track cast impression that we found on expedition was in 15 pieces.
Wow.
It's back together.
It is.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So it was quite a jigsaw puzzle, you know?
Yeah. Well, we're quickly getting to the point where with these higher level iPhones, the LiDAR apps that allow you to do 3D scans, plaster is going to become a thing of the past. So it won't be too much longer. I think we won't have to schlep plaster around when we're backpacking or hiking, as long as you've got battery power.
That's true. Well, I always bring my backup battery packs with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
when we're out in the field, of course. But no, it's a good point you bring up. With technology changing, it's funny you mentioned that because in the episode that you did with Monster Quest, I think it was the part 2 though with Snellgrove, they were talking about the scent, the scent bait. Pheromone chips, right? And they had the tracking device sandwiched between them. And the guy who was tracking the signal was holding what looked like an antenna from above on the roof. And I laughed at that because I'm thinking to myself, nowadays we'd have that app on our phone probably, you know?
Probably, yeah. If the transmitter was strong enough, that's all it would take is a phone app, I'm sure, yeah.
When the rocks were being thrown there, was that a little more intense than it looked like on TV?
Well, it depends on who you asked. When the rock hit the roof, you know, and resounded pretty loudly, I was facing in that direction. I had my back to the lake and was facing the cabin. We were standing around a big kind of culvert fire pit, and we would routinely be up, late each night. And this was it must have been somewhere between 1 or midnight and 1. It was after midnight at least. And so I saw just out of the corner of my eye, I caught the motion and looked up just in time to see the rock bounce across. And but most of the rest of them mostly just heard the report of that golf ball size rock bouncing across the corrugated roof. So they freaked out. Just went
beeline
the cabin like a little line of peahens. I jokingly teased them, and I'm sitting here saying, "Why? Where are you going? Where are you going? This is why we're here."
Right.
And, it was hilarious though because there was, because of the height of the culvert around the fire pit, there was a long shadow cast down across the ground there, and it kind of obscured some of the chopped up firewood. And so as I took a side step to get their attention, I stepped on one of those pieces of firewood and rolled my ankle and just went down like a rock. Well, they thought I had been hit by a second rock. To their credit, they came out to my rescue, and I was, further chided them. Oh, we were going in to get the cameras. That was their excuse.
Was Doug running into the cabin also?
Yeah. Doug was at the front of the line, I think. No, he was. Then we did what wasn't portrayed is we did venture out into the woods. We had we had some very early versions of thermal cameras and of course night vision. And so we were scouting out. I mean, it's just kind of treacherous because you're on the Canadian Shield. It's very rocky.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
that lake we were beside, there were, it really wasn't at its deepest point more than, say, 15 feet. And it's just
Oh,
like
wow.
a big puddle with a rock bottom. It's like a dish. And there's all sorts of crevices, though. And
Exactly.
the ground is moss covered. So it's like booby traps all over the place. So when you go off trail, there is just a few portage trails between lakes. You go off trail, you're kind of having to be very cautious in walking. You're taking your life, not your life necessarily, but your legs. You
Yeah.
might step into a 2-foot crevasse there and snap a tibia. So
And you're not close to any hospitals in the area.
no, I mean,
That's for
airlift
sure.
is all you've got. And so anyway, we that was the unfortunate blurb, little soundbite that got used was a comment that Kurt Nelson made, and that was here we are cowering in the cabin. Well, he he was a little bit traumatized. He went on this trip rather skeptical, and
Uh-huh.
when this series of things happened, it really impacted him. And so he made that comment, and I got so much mail, so many emails with people chiding me then or admonishing me. What are you doing cowering in the cabin? Why aren't you out there looking? I says, we were. You don't understand what happened,
Now,
so.
I gotta ask though, because I've heard you say this, I think that the thing that may have initiated the response was somebody urinated off the porch of the cabin. Is that correct?
Well, it was either that or the other theory. Yes, the Doug's son, Dwayne, was the outhouse was back about 30 yards behind the cabin, right at the edge of the tree line.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to, you walked along this little catwalk to get back there, but it's pitch black once the
And
sun goes
scary.
down, and so it's a little bit of a hike, and it's a little spooky back there for someone who's city born and bred.
Absolutely.
That would be dark for anybody.
Yeah.
That would be a long hike for just about anybody.
I mean, now the report is he's a avid outdoorsman, so I don't mean to characterize
Disparage.
it
Nah, not at
negatively
all.
now.
Not at
in
all.
any
But I just
case,
thought it was funny because
Yeah.
I can relate with that because I actually was out in the Pine Barrens one morning on Thanksgiving morning, and I was out there looking for tracks in the snow, and I myself urinated on a tree and then did 3 knocks on this stump, and I was growled at so loudly that it vibrated my right ear.
Sure, yeah.
And I turned and went, whoa, and I responded with a huff response.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
growled again, another huff I did, growled again. I started talking to it. This is one of my stories that I've shared on previous episodes. So it kind of made me think that this could be maybe a response from a potential male, Sasquatch.
Well, sure, that
saying
could well be. We kind of distance ourselves from those bodily functions and don't really acknowledge the biological legacy, that the meanings that they have in other animals.
Right.
And if you have pets, if you have dogs, when the dogs that will lift their leg and pee on your friend's picnic basket or something with the market, that's always embarrassing. But
exactly,
in humans, it's used more as an insult than territorial or dominant gesture. But
I thought there was maybe some relevance, with the connection
that
between
could well
the two.
have been. The other possibility that I had suggested was most guests at that cabin only stay for maybe 2 or 3 nights, and we were there for the full week. And the instructions that were actually posted there inside the kitchen cabinet door read, when you're preparing to leave, all perishables, bread, fruit, vegetables, any packaged items that were already opened are to be thrown out beyond the outhouse into the woods.
Wow.
And only canned goods and unwrapped, open packages or boxes
Huh.
could stay inside to avoid the foods, or I'm sorry, the
Smell.
smells of foods lingering in the cabin when it was unoccupied and attracting bears.
Hmm.
And so, you think about it, someone in any animal. I mean, our dogs have the morning feeding routine down pat. They know where they're supposed to
Right.
be. They know who gets fed first, who gets in and out of the X pen, who gets to go outside first. They know that down pat. So it doesn't take a lot of brains, but I can see a Sasquatch realizing that when a float plane arrives and guests disembark, that in about 3 days there's going to be a little smorgasbord out behind the outhouse. But if we
Yeah.
were there kind of past our grace period of 3 days, and fifth day, they maybe we're getting a little impatient.
Annoyed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Let's encourage these
Huh.
interlopers, from.
I wonder if the
move on.
cabin owners, I don't know if it was Mossberg, I forget their name, but I wonder if the cabin owners actually had the guests do that as a way of gifting the locals,
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was just that's just kind of a
Prepared.
traditional
just
way
to keep
they
it
do
away
Yeah.
from going into,
Yeah,
which
they were
of
very
course,
specific. There was a station for cleaning fish, but all the entrails were supposed to be put in a bucket and then taken there was a little rock island just offshore. And the next time, well, not the next time, but before you finished with your chores, you took a boat and took that bucket of fish guts and dumped them out there on that rock, and then the birds had their way with them, and pretty soon
Wow.
it was just clean as can be. But all that scent was away from the cabin, and
Yeah, which is
attract
definitely
bears.
what you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed with what they were saying, and you were talking with one of the Bigfoot researchers that was there, or that they were interviewed. They said something that everybody always asks you, where do they travel? Do they migrate? What happens? He said something about native people. We stopped traveling and exploring to see where this next creek goes, or we're not following food anymore. Do you think they still would travel the same way that the Native Americans did? Are they traveling the same routes that they traveled for hundreds of years?
Oh, I'm sure that's probably the case. I mean, the only reason we don't see, Bigfoot game trails is that they're so few in number, and
Right.
they're probably so dispersed across the environment, across the habitat, in order to find those patchy resources. Being an omnivore, and that's generally where the foods are not homogeneously distributed, evenly throughout the forest. There's patchy areas where certain northern exposures, say, that are wetter, where there's more berries growing, and then there might be a grove of nut-bearing trees over here, or vice versa, or over here there's where the morels always pop up. Who knows? So I think yes, and in fact, in our I've done a lot of work with a colleague, John Mindzinski, over in the Wind River Range, and we've interacted a lot with the Eastern Shoshone and Arapaho tribes there, and they very frankly say, yeah, they move through a large area. We'll have a rash of encounters or reports of encounters, and then there'll be nothing for maybe 2-3 years as they move on and travel around through the territory.
I've heard that time period. I'm saying around 3 years.
Yeah, and
I
that's
wonder if that's because of food source, maybe.
Well, that too. I mean, and again, that's also the reason not only they don't leave game trails, but they don't leave a lot of sign of heavy foraging or browsing, or whatever, however you want to label it.
Mhm.
It gives the resources time to recoup and
To replenish. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
replenish.
sense. That really
Yeah.
does. Because I used to, being here in New Jersey, in southern New Jersey, it's not as a vast area as some other places, like where you are, of course, or British Columbia, right?
Sure.
So we're kind of landlocked in a sense, but the Pine Barrens is almost, like, I think 1.2 million acres. So there is plenty of, ground cover. We have the K&C Aquifer, which is the largest, purest drinking source practically on Earth. Okay. And then we have tons of food source, not only, plant species, but of course, ungulates, tons of deer and everything else, So we do have what I would consider a breeding population. I used to think there was maybe like a 5 to 10 mile range of them foraging in this area.
Oh,
But I have to say, it's got to be bigger. Got to be bigger. Yeah.
Our estimates based on interactions I've had with other researchers using different approaches to patterns of the distribution of reports, repeat appearances of individuals, place their estimates place the home range at about 30 miles by 30 miles, so almost 1,000 square miles.
And
so,
I've heard you say even 50 miles to 100 miles in some cases, right?
Well, sure. It's going to vary depending on the
geography.
The productivity, the habitat, the patchiness of the habitat, the topography. So it's going to vary a lot. I mean,
So because I have some casts behind me from the Pine Barrens, which are similar in size, and they were found about, I would say, roughly 20 to 25 miles away from one another. And so that's one reason I kind of altered my stance on what I thought originally of the 5 to 10 mile range,
Right. Yeah. And it's, you look at other species. If you look at the estimates of home range size for something like a grizzly bear or a black bear, the values vary tremendously, and they can vary depending on the individual animal's circumstances as well. A mother with cubs, for example, will have a much smaller range. A male that is dominating a particular region might patrol a much larger area. So, and then again, depending on the resources, and it's hard to know, what circumstances exactly. It's hard, and it's impossible to generalize, universally at all. So there's always going to be variation.
What have you ever had a good, like a visual encounter in all your researching?
Marginally, not a good or a great one, I'd say, but I mean, I've found tracks on a number of occasions. I've heard vocalizations. If you in the beginning of my book, I relate the experience we had in the Six Rivers National Forest, where something came into camp and brushed against the tent and left tracks that were quite distinctive. I've had rocks thrown at me, and then I think it's almost 3 years now. I was up in Alberta at the invitation of Todd Standing, which has made it a very controversial story to ever bring up because of the very polarized opinions about Todd. But we had some really good experiences there. Both Dr. Bindernagel and I were there with him.
Sure.
And there was another investigator, Sonia, and Todd's father-in-law was kind of our camp quartermaster. And anyway, we to make a long story short, on the last evening that I was to be there, John stayed on a bit longer, but something approached camp and was breaking brush. It was making these whistling bird-like calls at like 2:30 in the morning, and then I caught a glimpse of it through my night vision monocular under very low light conditions without any supplemental illumination. So there's a lot of noise, even on a Gen 3, it's still
right.
And being a single lens, your depth perception is flattened. But the closest thing that I can to help you visualize what I saw, if you imagine Patty as she's walking behind the debris from the flood debris there, the logs and detritus there, but jet black. Picture her jet black in silhouette against a slightly lighter gravel roadbed. She broke from the tree line on one side of that road and angled up across this slope and disappeared into the other. And there was a berm that blocked the road. We were camped up at the end of this road right against the berm. And so the berm and the grass, there was quite tall grass growing off that berm, loosened soil. It obscured it up to about mid-thigh, much like Patty is obscured by the intervening debris in the foreground. So that, if you picture that, that's kind of what I saw. But again, lots of snow, lots of noise.
Right.
The moon wasn't up in the sky. We just had the ambient starlight, and the fire, the light cast from the fire. But sometimes that creates contrasts, with the foreground versus the background and so on. That makes it even more challenging to see.
Well,
So it's not the look in your eyes and make a connection kind of a sighting. That's what I'd really love to experience.
But it was definitely enough to make you think that's what it was.
Yeah. I was hesitant to even mention it, that when I had that night vision up to my eye and I saw this and also, when you're looking, when you're outdoors, if you understand the way the retina, the human and ape retina is higher primates, monkeys and apes have a lack of a reflecting membrane, but they have a focal point, a fovea it's called, and surrounded by a macula that is relatively free of blood vessels, so you have greater visual acuity, but you have a concentration of cones, color sensitive cells, receptors in the retina. Well, under low light conditions, those cells don't get triggered very, very well. The rods are sensitive to low levels of gray tones, and but they are more concentrated in the periphery. So that's the anatomical basis of what you've all experienced when you say drop your keys in the parking lot at night and you reach down looking for them. You see a little kind of a ghostly, almost a little fog right in the center of your vision.
Right.
That's because the focal point is not working very well under those low light conditions. And a trick you learn, they teach military people and police officers, is you what they call averted gaze. You look just to the side of where you think your keys might be, and then the image falls just to the periphery where there are more rods and you can see better. So as I'm looking through this monocular, I was afraid maybe what I saw was just a little ghostly phantasm that was just the fog in front of my focal point. And I was looking and I was moving the night vision back and forth to see if I could recreate what I had seen. But and that's why I was very keen on, and as I explained this to John, and I thought I've got to at least talk to John about it, John Bindernagel, and I wanted them to be sure to look for any sign of passage of this creature where I thought I had seen it. And sure enough, the next day they did. After I had to leave to catch a plane, I was gone before sunup, and but they did cut some sign there on that slope, and they were able to recreate with remarkable accuracy, I think, because when I watched Todd film it, watched the result of him standing where I'd been standing next to the fire pit, filming as John walked the path that they flagged out, that was it, except what I saw was about 1.5 feet taller than John.
Wow.
It was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting.
I always thought that you did, see something, a shadowy type figure. I didn't realize it was through night vision at the time.
Yeah.
But I kind of felt like Todd was continuing to kind of like badger you into getting you to say it. You know what I mean? Like,
well, sure. I mean, and that's what, he's promoting his efforts. Yeah.
No doubt.
And I've often, chided him or criticized him a little bit that if he has a fault, one of them is that he name drops. And I said, fine, we're here because both of us are very curious. We're interested. We want you to make your case for us. We want to
Right.
take advantage of your invitation to actually see boots on the ground, see what's transpiring. Let the evidence speak for itself. You know?
Sure.
I mean, you can certainly talk about our impressions and our commentary about the evidence, but you don't just simply say, I've had 2 PhDs up here, you know, they and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, hey, we did
anyway.
invite Todd to come on, and he hasn't yet fully responded. We got to, we got a reply from his people, from
He's
Phil.
busy.
Of course,
He is. Yeah, he's busy these days, from what I gather. So I haven't been in touch with him. I think I've spoken with him 2 or 3 times since that occurred. We both spoke at an event down in the south. Where were we? I can't remember.
Gatlinburg?
No,
maybe?
It wasn't the Gatlinburg one. It was I want to say we were in Louisiana, but I'm not positive anymore. I lose, like I said, I lose track. And
I know it.
Not what it used
totally,
to be.
totally gets jumbled. But no, I was just, we had to, of course, bring up the Monster Quest episode, because that really dates back to, some of the things that really got me excited to see you.
Sure.
And when I honestly heard you were going to be at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference at first, I was invited to attend by one of my attendee who became a friend. Him and his son-in-law were coming out, and they had the room reserved. They had tickets, and he said, Eric, I want you to come as my guest, you and your wife, Heather. And so he did the driving. He had the room accommodations, everything. How could I refuse? So I canceled my NASCAR race tickets for that weekend, and we took the trip with them. And of course, I was, so pleased to have the opportunity to meet you. And Heather was like, Dr. Meldrum, can I have a selfie? And you were so gracious.
Oh, sure.
I got the books and the guide, right? The field guide that you put together, which is awesome. I wish I had read it sooner. There's actually a track casting.
Yes, there you go. Well, at least,
right inside.
For the casts and the prints in the ground.
It doesn't do me any good sitting up on the shelf. You know what I mean, Doctor?
No. Right.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. No, that's a good admonition for everybody.
But it's funny because I mentioned to you that I had been making the mold with the cast, and we did complete three track cast molds, but they're made out of rubber. Okay. So I have now received silicone material to make the proper molds, because what we do when I go, and Nathan and I take people out on expedition, one of the things we do is a track casting demo. Okay.
Right.
So rather than have to dig up the soil or use loose gravel on the ground or whatever, I thought it would be great to have molds made up that I can demonstrate and present to the winner of our trivia contest. You know what I mean? So as I finished, repairing and gluing the original, I said, you know what, let me try making a cast this morning, because I wanted to be able to show you, Dr. Meldrum, how it came out. And it's intact.
Yep.
I have not yet taken it out of the plaster, but I did use dental casting stone.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you gentlemen would like to humor me, but this would be an opportune time to see if we have a successful cast. Would you say?
Sure.
And hopefully it doesn't break in my hands as I'm taking it out of the mold material.
No,
I used a release agent. You talk about the hairspray, which is what I've always used on our expeditions, but this is actually one that we received with the products we ordered. Hey, it came out. It came out.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't use hairspray as a releasing agent. That's a consolidant when your soil is loose or dust is loose.
Right.
And
I
nothing,
think that would be kind of sticky. You want to use a silicone.
Nothing. I'm glad to know that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll change my nothing left in the mold. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
The neat thing about this original cast was it even had the leaves on there. You can actually see the leaf impressions.
Yeah.
So that is pretty amazing, I have to say.
Now that's one of your examples from the Pine Barrens?
This is the first one that I cast in the Pine Barrens that we found on expedition. It had rained overnight. This was located by a creek right next to a bridge that went over the road that took us past the campground where we were. And one of my attendees found the other one that's on my top shelf and, radioed me to come down. And I said, Oh, it's interesting, but it was kind of like, I think the individual was avoiding detection by a passing motorist overnight. So she
Oh,
came down the side of the embankment by the bridge and slid with her one foot, and then stepped and crouched down behind a bush alongside the creek with her other foot.
hmm.
As I'm looking at the one he showed me, I looked to my left under the bush and I said, "Oh, and here's another one."
Oh,
I said,
excellent.
and that's great. I was going to do a track casting demo today, and now we have real ones.
There you go. Yeah. Well, that one,
What
the one you sent me pictures of,
is this
didn't
one?
have that big toe sticking out to the side.
You know, I knew I couldn't fool Dr. Meldrum. That's awesome. And I was going to admit that too, because that's not what we're in the business about. We don't hoax and make up things. I molded a toe. And the reason
Okay.
I did that, Dr. Meldrum, is because of the way she was crouching. And I'm saying she, because if you compare this to the Patterson cast that I have, they're nearly identical. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, the proportions are pretty.
The dimensions are almost identical as far as the length and the thickness of the cast. You know what I mean? I got this one from Cliff also when we were at Ohio, and it's amazing how similar they are. But I actually molded the toe, and you picked right up on that. And this is the first time I'm looking at it. So, but if you put these up together side by side, you can see the thickness is similar.
Absolutely, yeah.
The length is fairly similar as well. Okay.
Right.
But who better to ask though? How does the big toe look?
It looks reasonably good. Now, did the original print have such a feature and it just didn't take in the mold, or are you using some artistic license there?
I'm using some artistic license for the simple fact that, like I said, when she was crouching there avoiding detection, it wasn't pressed in on the big toe.
Okay.
It had the other four, but not the big toe.
Okay, gotcha.
And so that one, I'm stuck. That was the original cast.
Right. Yeah, that looks
and it's missing the toe here.
Yeah.
But I did manage to put it together.
Yeah. That's good.
So I added casting material on the back. I actually put it into, after I glued it, I put it back into the mold I made and added more casting material on top.
There you go. Yeah.
Kind of make it a little sturdier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Anyway, I'm just excited because this is now a complete foot with the added toe. So it's interesting because I know that there was another show. I forget what it was. It might have been Is the Proof Out There, where they tried to bring you some faked footprints or something, and you picked right up on it.
Yeah, there was one. It was Les Stroud.
Les, that's who it was. Survivor Man.
Yeah, Survivor Man, Bigfoot. Yeah, there was that one, and that was intentional. There was another one where they had a bear track, and they were trying to. They presented it to me as if it were a Yeti to get my reaction, and so I didn't appreciate that very much.
No,
I actually cast. We were out researching, and I came across a beautiful black bear print, and I said, I have to cast this to take it along just to show people the vast difference between the two. Yeah, because a bear print looks nothing like a squat print at all.
No, there's just only the biggest. The hind foot has that more plantigrade posture, so it's more elongated, and it's one of the few animals, large animals, that has all 5 toes in contact with the ground. That isn't digitigrade with the elongated digits and the thumb and big toe, or inner toe, not big toe, but the inner toes up in the air. So which gives the the felids and canids the 4-digit imprint. So it's a great demonstration. It's a great, and I encourage people to make casts of their themselves, of their family members, of their pets, so they can practice the technique. You don't want to learn by trial and error when you've got a bona fide Bigfoot track out there in the
That's
field.
right.
Absolutely.
Messing it up.
This is a juvenile we found. That 2 of my attendees crossed over the stream and went downstream, and they actually found 18 impressions. And I made 5 casts of them at that time. This is the first one I made. This one I actually did use dental casting stone with the juveniles. The original The original one, of course, I only used regular plaster. That's why it broke when we took it out. But I mean, it's got some good thickness to it. It was there's no transverse arch. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was going to say it's fairly flat foot. The toes, the heel's kind of deep, but it's got a deep impression of the narrow heel. Yeah, it would be worth looking at more closely.
But that was interesting find. And this past April, my research friend Art and another friend were out, and they discovered some impressions, but it had gotten rained upon. And so he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I found these track, impressions. Do you think it's worth checking out?" I said, "It's always worth checking out." So of course I got my material together, and I was there the next morning, and I made again another 4 or 5 casts that they had discovered, very similar in size to that. Different time of the year, you know what I mean? The original ones were in October, and then these were April of this past year. And so again, I made another 4 casts, I think, of that find.
Yeah.
I just enjoy, even if it's just practice, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but still, what was the context? What was the individual doing that?
Again, on the opposite side of the bridge, where these other ones were found back in 2015, were 4 or 5 other track impressions heading upstream, okay, right along the bank. And yes, people do put in kayaks and canoes at this location.
I was wondering.
And that's always a possibility. Now, on my expedition, of course, we had trail cameras set up, and there was nobody that was doing that at the time these casts were found on expedition. But again, the direction that these potential juvenile casts or footprints were heading, 2 of my attendees also had a visual sighting upstream that year also. So we're thinking that there could potentially be some regular activity in this area, you know?
Yeah, sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, it's possible.
I've been working with an anthropologist recently, and we were talking about the amount of evidence. And they seem to think that just by all the soft evidence we have, that we have more or less proven their existence. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Dr. Bindernagel's second book sort of adopts that premise. His argument is that Sasquatch has been discovered. It's just that it hasn't been acknowledged by the scientific community officially.
Right.
And so that, I mean, ultimately, we can quibble over semantics and parley over this or that opinion of what warrants discovery and what doesn't. But ultimately, it boils down to the science requires a physical specimen, whether a part or a whole body, something that's sufficiently diagnostic to demonstrate the existence of a novel species. And so short of that, I mean, even a novel DNA sequence, which is going to be challenging, I think, because of the proximity, because of the affinity of this species to us. We may be talking about a half, a tenth, 0.2% difference in DNA. So it's going to require a very systematic and comprehensive genomic sequencing to really affirm. And then there is no precedent for recognizing a novel species on the basis of DNA alone. There's a lot of people arguing for that in the cases of rare and endangered species, where if the collection, the lethal collection of a type specimen or a physical specimen can be avoided, then that's preferred. But maybe Sasquatch will be the test case for such an approach, the acknowledgement of such an approach. But
so we to this date that you know of, we have no decent DNA.
No.
Okay.
No, and despite the various claims that have been made out there, no, there's nothing that stands up to scrutiny. Okay. And so
the only real thing we have is Patty so far.
Well, I mean, it's
as far as more than footprints and whatnot.
Exactly. Well, more than footprints, we have we have hair samples that, even though we don't
Right.
have DNA from those hair, as an anatomist versus a molecular biologist, the anatomy of the hair should be sufficient, really, but it's just people are ultra conservative in their conclusions, their analysis. But I mean, this is how we came to kind of establish what we think is the gold standard for Sasquatch hair. Typically, hair is identified by comparing an unknown to a known specimen in a collection.
Right.
Okay, well, we don't have any known Sasquatch hair, so hairs that were allegedly attributable to Sasquatch invariably were identified as indeterminate, as unknown.
Right.
Well, I was sitting pondering over these repeated reports concluding an unknown species, and I when I learned of Henner Fehrenbach's work and interest in hair, I put my head together with him and I said, "What do you think of this? If indeed, as I suspect you feel as well, these hair are from Sasquatch, then or from any." There needs to be a set of criteria that these researchers are using to conclude that this hair is different than their samples in their collections. So let's go back and see if we can find some of these reports and see what are the criteria they use to describe, to characterize these indeterminate unknown samples. And we did that for several, and sure enough, they all had the same distinguishing characteristics. They all differed in the same way. They all came from a similar source. Even though that source was unknown. So that kind of became the gold standard. Parallel-sided hair shafts with a blunt wear, a lack of a cellular medulla, fairly fine, only 65 microns. These large pigment lozenges of eumelanin and pheomelanin scattered throughout, and so and distinctive cuticle structure. But the only other thing these hair could be would be human.
Okay.
And it's fairly unusual for human to lack a cellular medulla. Not unheard of.
Blondes, I think, right? Blonde.
Yeah,
hair
exactly.
individuals.
Very light colored blonde with fine hair. But we have samples of Sasquatch, a putative Sasquatch hair that spans the entire color phase spectrum from blonde to dark mahogany black, and they all have this consistent lack of a cellular medulla.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's very distinctive in that way.
I just got an electron microscope from my friend Art, and I had some hair presented to me that was found on expedition in northern New Jersey last year. And so I looked at it under the microscope, but I did find medulla. So I'm kind of thinking it was bare. It's black, it's coarse.
And if it's coarse, if it's wider and if it has a tapering tip, then it could be the guard hair.
And it did. It had a tapering tip as well. So I didn't feel it was necessary to send it along to somebody else to analyze further. You know what I mean? It's pretty definitive, I would say. But no, I'm excited, and I'll tell you what. As I mentioned when we have spoken in the past, he was so gracious at Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Willing to take selfies with Heather and spend time talking with people. He did a great presentation. I finished the Meldrum cast. I even penciled in where the chips were missing. How's that look?
Looks good.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Even read the back, like you said. Not bad for an amateur, And see that one up there?
Oh, yeah.
That's the Pine Barrens cast. I tried that thing we talked about after I glued it.
Yeah.
I couldn't glue the two parts that were two big parts together properly, so I glued it, and then I put it in the mold like we talked about and poured the casting material over it, and it started to get hard so quick. I'm like, so I started spreading it around. Not quite what I anticipated. Okay.
Yeah.
But it when I took it out, it broke in that
Mm.
2 pieces. So I glued that and I put rubber bands crisscrossing on it to hold it together. And I left it for like 24 hours. And now it's solid. You can see the crack in it, but
Mhm. It's hard to see.
that's the Pine Barrens cast. I made a track today,
Yeah.
which we can unveil while we talk to Jeff. What do
Okay.
you think?
Sure.
And that was a fun. I was videoing it. I was going to make a
Mhm.
track casting 101, right? So then, of course, the doorbell rings. I go up. I thought I hit pause. I had it on my light ring, in the holder.
Yeah.
I come up. I help the customer. Turns out the customer's like, "Oh, that episode you did with the." I'm like, so start talking about the short where
Okay.
where I'm out in the woods. When I pan it, you see something in the background, a black shadow standing in the back by the tree. Turns out
Yeah.
it's Heather. Okay. He mentioned the 1-lane bridge was that a knock? But yeah, I thought that would be cool. And we could talk to him about, like you said, some of those things he was involved in, and also about track casting. Mention certain names like Doug Hychek, the producer from not only Monster Quest, but Mysterious Encounters, that series that preceded Finding Bigfoot, right? Of course, I have Dr. Esteban Sarmiento's name down here because he was also on that sequence episode with Jeff. Kurt Nelson was the microbiologist who we were trying to think of that day. That was Kurt Nelson, who was in the cabin with Dr. Meldrum when the rocks were being thrown. Oh, and the DNA analyst is Todd Standing from NYU. So I did all my research to make sure I knew who was who and what was what, and I know you're interested in what he experienced with Todd Standing, right?
Yeah. Just
That's one
see
of the
what he.
things you're curious about.
Yeah.
Do an intro.
Yes.
Okay. That way, if it goes long and we decide to make 2 episodes out of it, I'll have this one and another one kind of thing. Tonight, we have joining us Dr. Jeff Meldrum. He's an anthropologist, and oh my God, I can't believe I rehearsed this too. I'm sorry. Okay. Take 2.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, I need blooper material. I'll still do a blooper material at the end.
Sure.
We have a special guest joining us tonight.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's happening.
Hey. I forgot my coffee and my black rifle, so I will need to grab that at some point. Where the hell's my mug?
Stupid kernels.
I'm not telling you nothing because every time anybody says anything, you go an extra week. So.
That's right.
I'm going to have a black rifle coffee this evening. Whoop, whoop. Our friends at Black Rifle Coffee Company.
How do I sound tonight? Okay.
You sound great.
Wonderful. I'm going to try to make it to Christmas and put the red suit on.
Well, Waylon will dig that because he'll be at that age where he'll understand things, So you're okay with this Squatch shirt? You got yours on? What's that? I can't see. That's one of the
Gatlin
big
bird.
ones. Gatlin, perfect.
But
Esteban Sarmiento is going to be at the event.
Who?
The primatologist that was on the same episode as Jeff Meldrum. He's going to be speaking at Mike O'Connell's event at Kearney Cottage.
Really?
Yes. I'm going
That's
on
cool.
after him. I'm in between Esteban and Ken Gerhard.
That's awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
So it'll be fun. Eric Mintel's going. He's one of the speakers now.
Nice.
You're still welcome.
It's getting big.
Cheers. One last thing. I want to, at the end, when we're wrapping things up and we've finished, I'm going to ask him to do a station identification for us.
There you go.
This is Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and you're watching Squatch Talks podcast. Thanks for
go.
squatching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Squatch Talks podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and give us a like, and stay tuned for more exciting stories on Squatch Talks.